We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton with Cannabis.net.
Every week, Curt and I get together to talk about the week's biggest stories in the cannabis industry from here in Massachusetts to the West Coast to around the world. And this week, we start here in the Bay State where COVID has hit a local dispensary. You know which one, too, don't you, Curt?
I believe it's Netta in Brookline. And once again, we may be seeing curbside pickup, just like the first COVID strike. But obviously, a lot of sick employees down there. It's not going to be limited to just cannabis businesses, obviously, as this wave comes in. But it's certainly something that, you know, as a retail store, you have to have those contingency plans.
It was 2 office workers who tested positive, but of course, they came in contact with 28 other employees. So 30 people at Netta are now in quarantine. And you know, Curt, this is the second time Netta has had an issue with positive COVID cases. And the Department of Public Health actually has records of 10 more cases in different dispensaries around the state. So the pandemic is everywhere and it's not going away soon.
Well, hopefully they cut their teeth on the, curbside delivery the first time around, right? We got Governor Baker to move on that. And, you know, they've already run through the process. And if they had to flip it back on, let's hope it's kind of like a transition that's pretty quick.
And somehow or other, people are still buying weed in the state of Massachusetts because they passed the $1 billion mark in the state. That's a lot of weed to be sold since the beginning in November of 2018.
It's a lot of tax revenue, more importantly, and that's what we're looking at the federal level. And remember, Governor Baker is not a fan of cannabis. This was a slow rollout, drag your feet, kicking and pulling, and a lot of towns opted out. So 1 billion sounds like a big number, but really it could be closer to like what Illinois did, $1 billion in their first X amount of months if we had opened the gates and really made it a vibrant program.
Right. In the meantime, let's check out the earnings of the big MSOs with Deb Borchardt of the Green Market Report. Deb?
Thanks, guys. Well, once again, it was another big week for earnings from some of the industry's biggest players. Curaleaf reported total revenue of $182 million. That was a 195% increase over last year. Still, they reported a net loss of $9.3 million. They also announced that the current president, Joseph Bayern, has been appointed as the company's next CEO. The current CEO, Joseph Lusardi, is going to be named the executive vice chairman of the board. Cresco Labs released unaudited financial results for the third quarter with revenue hitting $153.3 million. Now, this was a 63% sequential increase over the second quarter revenue of $93 million and an even bigger jump over last year's revenue of $36 million for the same time period. They also delivered net income of $4.9 million for the quarter. And Florida-based Trulieve reported revenue of $136 million for the third quarter. This was a 13% sequential increase over the second quarter, and they beat analyst estimates. Trulieve also delivered positive net income of $17.4 million. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
One state that every MSO is eyeing already is New Jersey. Now that the voters have spoken on legalization, legislators in the Garden State are getting involved in the plans for regulation. Now, after a snag earlier this week, they have agreed that carrying 6 ounces of weed in that state will be legal. Now, you can't sell it yet, but at least there is some peace of mind. Curt, 6 ounces is a lot of weed, especially when it's medical grade potency, right?
The best part is that the people making the rules have no idea what flour is and how much it weighs. Massachusetts did the same thing. I think when they first opened, it was something like you have like 10 ounces every 90 days because someone who wrote it has no idea what they're doing. Like that sounds 10 ounces. I guess that's about right. If you look at the numbers, you couldn't encourage a black market or selling to your friends anymore by letting them buy that much weed. But, you know, as New Jersey pushes forward with this, it's certainly making New York move quickly because they don't want to lose that tax revenue. And you know what's right next to New York? DC, right, Jimmy? So let's go to Vote Pro Pot Podcast and Phil Adams, who had me on as a guest this week. Thank you.
Hi, this is Phil Adams with Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC Report. The most popular candidate in the 2020 elections appears to have been cannabis. In the 5 states where adult use and/or medical cannabis legalization was on the ballot, Arizona, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota, more Americans voted for cannabis legalization than for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Cannabis also beat out many of the down-ballot candidates of both parties by sizable margins. Former President Barack Obama appears to have been no fan of cannabis legalization during his time in office. In his recently published memoir, A Promised Land, Obama describes how he used negotiations with GOP lawmakers to deflect calls for legalization and other, quote, less orthodox ideas. In spite of being the first president to openly acknowledge cannabis use in his youth, Obama had presided over more raids on state legal dispensaries during his first term than his predecessor George W. Bush had in 8 years. Regarding descheduling, Obama's policy was to defer to legislation by the legislative branch. In a 2014 interview with CNN, Obama said, quote, "What is and isn't a Schedule I narcotic is a job for Congress." A prominent Senate Republican is calling on his colleagues to take up the Safe Banking Act. Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania told American Banker he'd be open to working with Democrats to pass the Secure and Safe Enforcement Banking Act, even if the Senate remains in GOP control. Toomey said he is, quote, sympathetic to the idea that people who are involved in the cannabis industry in an entirely legal fashion ought to be able to have ordinary banking services. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Now, there might be another state looking to get into the legal weed world. It's Virginia. Their governor, Ralph Northam, announced he would introduce legislation to legalize adult use of cannabis in his state. Now, I know the Vote Pro Pot guys probably are very happy to hear about that. Curt, did you enjoy your appearance on that show?
It was one of the best, if not the best highlight of my online career. Obviously not with this show, which is the highlight of my online career. But yes, they have a great show. Look it up. They're big on Spotify and some of the other podcasting. It is Vote Pro Pot Podcast. Check that out. And they do a great report. And they're in DC. They're the ones who are telling you what they're hearing, what they're seeing in the bills, the legislatures. So definitely a must listen to. Check them out.
Indeed. So while other states are checking out what it will take to legalize cannabis for tax revenue, of course, Forbes reports that Bank's CEO Carson Humiston forecasts that the 5 states who recently voted for legalization at the ballot box will add 26,000 jobs in this cannabis space. Now, Curt, you've heard me rail about how cannabis as a plant should be synonymous with job growth. It's part of this perfect storm for weed that's happening right now.
Yeah, I think Karsten's taking the under on that. She's betting Vegas low because that should be really, even in Arizona, if you just think of just the kind of the metropolitan areas, you could see where you could chew up a good amount of those jobs as well as the cultivations in a hot climate. So I'm going higher. I'm going to go $1 over. So there you go.
You're going for the over. All right. Also announced last week was the formation of an association of cannabis regulators from 19 states, the Cannabis Regulators Association, or CANRA. Norman Birnbaum will head up that association. He's from New York. He, of course, has a medical program, but hasn't got into the adult use world. But we do know that New York is trying to do that. This will serve as a sounding board or an open forum for regulators from different states to share ideas and best practices for rolling out these new markets. So, Curt, this is kind of a good sign for a growing industry, isn't it?
It is, and it's really a response to the federal prohibition ban. You're starting to see these quasi-state level governmental groups trying to figure out a way to do interstate trade, going back to the 1742 Magna Carta New York thing. So again, it's certainly progress when you have all sorts of states getting together to kind of form a committee. But once federal, if the MORE Act passed and you pull that substance off the Controlled Substance Act, none of this stuff's going to matter. You don't need any regulators. Don't need any of this. It's going to be removed from the ban list as far as interstate trade.
So speaking of growing, and that's what's going on in a new state of Maine, Took them a few years to get it going, but it is, in fact, going very, very well at the Vacation Land location. And who better to keep us up with that growth than our main man himself, Ry Russell from WeedBudz Radio. Ry?
Your main man here, Ry Russell from WeedBudz Radio, with your Maine Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. As Maine's adult use program continues to roll out slower than anticipated, Maine's largest cannabis retailer, Wellness Connection, is stepping into the adult use market on Monday under a new brand, High North Maine. Leadership from Wellness Connection, Suzanne Pingree and Charlie Langston, said in an exclusive interview on WeedBudz Radio that High North is a tribute to all of the natural beauty we have here in the Pine Tree State. Their South Portland location will be their first to convert to this new brand and will no longer be able to serve medical patients. However, their Portland location will continue to serve Maine's medical marijuana community. As the adult use market here in Maine continues to serve that local community, the industry is already preparing for the potential increase in tourism. Many retailers are already seeing the impact of slow cultivation approvals, driving up the prices of wholesale cannabis. And these retailers are hopeful that more cultivation facilities will enter the market, lowering prices and allowing them to serve patrons without fears for running out of product. That will do it for this week's Maine Cannabis Report. I'm Ry Russell from WeedBudz Radio, reporting for Weed Talk News.
Another country that is moving towards legalization is the country that is just south of the United States. That would be Mexico, for those of you who might be geographically challenged. Now, rather quickly, that Senate has passed it over the weekend, and that's good news, especially if you want legalization in the United States. Right, Curt?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the cost of labor, electricity, transportation, they may have a familiarity of how to move things across borders that are prohibited in one country. Yeah, that's just going to drive prices down and margins. And if you're in the US, you're going to let that market take, 20% of what could be taxed at the federal or state level. I hope not.
And it also means that the United States is squeezed between two legal countries, Canada to the north, Mexico to the south. Now, as we turn to another country that's moving towards legalization, that country is Israel. And of course, they're in the Middle East, which is a far way away from the United States. But the Promised Land has always been at the forefront of science and research, and they have a very active medical program. But now their Minister of Justice, Avi Nissenkorn, sees legalization as inevitable over the next 9 months. I say muzzle tov to that, Curt.
Someone's got to tell Ari that it's raining weed. Those drones keep dropping weed all over Israel. You got to catch it and tax it. Make a penny off that.
That's the idea anyway. That is the idea. Now, one more little note about cannabis legalization, and it comes from Madison, Wisconsin, which is the capital of Wisconsin. It's also where the University of Wisconsin is. And now the city council there is allowing public consumption of cannabis for 18-year-olds plus. Obviously, they made a bit of an exception knowing that there, is a university in town. That's a pretty good move. And now you can now smoke your cannabis in public. Now, there's a little caveat here, Curt, and it has to do with students on campus. You still can't walk around with your bong or any other type of paraphernalia because you'll get a ticket. And you know how big that ticket is, Curt?
How big, Jimmy?
I knew you'd ask me. It's all of $1. And that's a big amount for a student at college, isn't it?
All I know, the guy who's offering the 5-cent chicken wings on Thursday night in downtown Madison, he's going to need a bigger boat.
So I got to ask you a question. Since we are going to take the week off for the Thanksgiving holiday, we will not be canceling it, but we will be postponing our news for 2 weeks. So I have to ask Mr. Curt Dalton, is an infused turkey dinner on the menu at the Dalton household for Thanksgiving next week?
It's funny you should ask, but there may be something coming out on cannabis.net about a private Thanksgiving stuffing recipe, cannabis infused style. So stay tuned.
And I'll be perfectly honest with you, that's always been the secret ingredient in my stuffing.
That's why everybody falls asleep.
That's right. But that just happens anyway, doesn't it? Isn't that what Thanksgiving's all about? Anyway, a happy Thanksgiving to you, Curt, and to your family as well.
Yeah, to everybody out there, enjoy the holiday. Hopefully you're getting a break from whatever it is we're doing. And even with the COVID stress, hopefully you can enjoy a nice meal and some football and maybe some cannabis.
That's right. That's what it's about. And that'll do it for Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton with Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly and have a safe, quiet Thanksgiving.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.